Welcome back. This video is a bit overdue, but we're going to continue our journey to create the Wordle. And on the screen is what we left from last video, where we create the Wordle prototype with the game board and the keyboard. So for the keyboard, we only have 3 keys for now, A, B, C. And obviously, this is not what we want to have in the final game. So we are going to essentially, instead of 3 keys, we actually need 3 rows, right? If you look at any keyboard, and let me see if I can just quickly show a keyboard like this, right? And for the Wordle, we only need the alphabets. So the 3 rows in the middle on this keyboard, the QWERTY, UIOP, and ASDF, ZXCV, so forth. These are the 3 rows of key that we need to have here, okay? So we are going to restructure this and then introduce a couple of concepts while we redo this keyboard, and hopefully things will make sense and work out, okay? So we are going to create a full keyboard, at least with the alphabets today, with JavaScript, okay? Now, to start the exercise, here again with this interface, and we were trying things here and there, but I don't really like the background color of the game board, so I'm going to actually remove the background here for the game board. So if you cursor on this, for example, if I want to remove this code line, perhaps I don't want to permanently remove it, but just want to comment it out so that it has no impact on the code. What I can do is that I can mouse on it, on the line, and then go to edit, and then see this toggle line comment, okay? And there's also a shortcut. Normally I would use shortcut, but just to show where it is, I can toggle it, or I can use a shortcut. So on Mac is Command/ or Control/ on Windows, okay? So once you mouse on it, cursor there, and then Command/, this is going to comment that thing out, and then refresh the interface. This is going to show the updated interface. So I removed that background color, and we'll continue to improve the game board. But for now, let's focus on the keyboard. Okay, so just to show you the ideas that I have. So for the keyboard, again, we are going to have 3 rows, right? And then in each row, we are going to have keys in the row. So within keyboard, ultimately, we are going to have a div, right? And in the div, so each div is basically going to be a kind of a key row. So maybe we can have a class of key row, and then inside that key row, we can have things such as keys. So for the first row, probably it's going to be, the QWERTY UIOP, right? So there will be Q, W, and then I'm not going to finish everything here, but just to show you the idea, okay? Q, W, E, and R, and so forth, right? For the first row, and then perhaps we can have a second row and have things such as A, right? A, S, D, right? And so forth, right? So this is incomplete, but once you have it there and refresh it, right? It's going to have the keys. Now, you notice one thing, right? When I put the keys in under the key rows, they are all listed in one column. And that's because for now, we do not have the necessary flex CSS to make the 3 rows and the keys in each row. So perhaps at this point we can change the CSS a little bit so that at least we can show the 2 rows here with the keys in each row, right? So let's go to the CSS. Okay, so index.css, and remember in the HTML we have the each row as class equal to key row, so we can have some class selector, okay, to redefine the rows within the keyboard. Okay, so remember 2 things here, 3 things actually. The keyboard is with ID equal to keyboard, right? And then within the keyboard there are key rows, and then within key rows there are keys, and key row and keys are classes. Okay, so keyboard we are going to use an ID selector in the CSS, but key row and key we are going to use class selectors. Okay, so just remember that. So first thing, let's start with the keyboard. Okay, so there is keyboard, and in my HTML I use capital K and capital B, so that is something I'm going to be consistent with. So the pound sign again here, this the pound sign or the hash, okay, is for an ID selector. Okay, so the keyboard is going to contain the key rows, right? So, and we're going to continue to use the flex design. So display will be flex, and then the flex direction, remember this, right? They are rows, and so those rows will be in basically one column. Okay, so row 1, row 2, and row 3, basically they will align in one column. So the flex direction for keyboard will be column. This may be counterintuitive, but once I show you, hopefully it will make sense. Okay, so flex direction for the keyboard should be column. Okay, so that's it for now for the keyboard. And then for the key row, remember we use class equal to key row, so we should use this dot, which signals a class selector. Okay, and again we are going to use display flex, right, for the flex design. But flex direction here, because each key row is going to contain a number of keys, and those number of keys will be in one row. Okay, and this is where we need to change it to change flex direction to row. Okay, so once we have done this, we already have some CSS for the key. We can give it a try to see if it will switch, and actually it does. So as you can tell, right, QWE, and we can compare to the HTML, right? QWE are in the first key row, and they are indeed in one row. Okay, and this is due to the CSS, okay, of this flex direction for the key row container, okay, that is going to be in a row. Okay, and then ASD in the second row, so they are listed, okay, again in a row. I hope this makes sense. Okay, so this is kind of the basic structure of what will ultimately go into the HTML. Okay, so now let's go to our JavaScript, because we are going to use JavaScript to create automatically the keyboard. Okay, and we are going to use some techniques such as array and loop for repetition, but we're going to do it step by step. Okay, so let's first go to index.js. So in our previous video, we created this render key function to kind of insert a key at a time. But here we actually need to not just insert not just keys, but also rows. Okay, so let's create another function, and let's call it render key row, something like that. Okay, for now. And we can add some comments such as, to insert a new row of keys onto the keyboard, something like that. Okay, and then we are also going to have a function to actually render the entire keyboard, because a keyboard is going to be, okay, either way, okay, a number of rows, and then ultimately we can call this render key row perhaps for 3 times, right? Because if we need 3 rows, we can kind of call it 3 times so that it will generate 3 rows. Okay, I hope this makes sense. So again, this is to insert create a keyboard with 3 rows of keys, okay, by calling the render key row for 3 times. So this render key row is going to be key, right? Very important function in our code. Now, there's also one more hook we need to correct. So because previously in HTML, and let's go to it. In HTML, we put on load equal to render key, right? So because we wanted to test that function, and we put it there so that when the page is loaded, it's going to render a key and so execute the function. But right now, we actually want to render the entire keyboard, okay? So let's change this to render keyboard for now. Okay, so this is going to call the function again, okay, render keyboard on load for the onLoad event. So whenever the page is loaded, it's going to call this render keyboard, which is defined in this function, okay? And as you can see in this function, this is going to call the render key row 3 times to generate the keyboard. Now let's refresh the page. And for now, there's nothing. Oh, one more thing. I do want to remove these, okay? Because the HTML code that I put in here is just to show you the idea. Is we are still going to use JavaScript to generate the keyboard. So you can comment these out or just remove them. Okay, I'm going to comment these out just so that we have a reference. And once you have done that and save it, again, refresh it. So once you refresh it, there's nothing in the keyboard, because in JavaScript, we are yet to have any code in the render key row. Okay, so we need to complete this function for the whole thing to work. And because we have already done the render key, okay, by inserting a new div, creating a new div, and then append that div as a child to the keyboard div. So I think we actually have a basic structure of code that we can reuse in this render key row. Okay, so we are going to follow the code above here and just to recreate the key row. Okay, so let's get started. And what we are going to do first is to create a variable, okay, to hold the row, and we can call it row div. Okay, this is going to be a div, and if you want, you can copy this statement. Okay, document dot create element div. Okay, this is going to create a div element in HTML, and then assign to this variable called row div. And now we can change the row div, change its class name attribute to key row. Okay, remember we have a key row class. Okay, once you have done that, this is going to use the CSS code. Okay, so if you go to css.keyRow, whatever div or HTML element with that class name equal to key row is going to use the CSS. Okay, this is important. And then once you have done that, we can append this as a child to the keyboard div. And again, we have the code above up here, right, for the keyboard div. Okay, so we can reference the keyboard div with using the variable keyboard underscore div, and then we can keyboard underscore div append child, and then raw div. Okay, so what we do here is basically we create a raw div with the class equal to key raw, and then assign or append the raw div as a child to the keyboard. Okay, so we can take a look. For now, the raw div has nothing, so perhaps we can put something in here so that at least some inner HTML. Okay, just this is a raw, so that we can at least see something, right? So once you have done that, save it and refresh, and you are going to see it's going to be 3 rows in here, because we in fact, call it 3 times from the render keyboard, okay, which is executed when the page is loaded. So we have the basic code, but there's no key yet, so we still need to insert keyed. Okay, so let me add some comment here. So insert a new row, right? Now insert keys to the new row, right? So right now we can still insert keys to this new row. So again, how do we create keys? We follow the same process. var, maybe there's a key div equal to document document.create element, and again we continue to use this div element to create whatever we need. Div is a very general element that we can use for almost anything. And so here the key div, right, inner HTML will be that key. That's just for the test. Let's put Q, right, because the first letter in the first row here, upper row, is going to be Q, right, for a QWERTY UIOP keyboard, right? So inner HTML is Q. Key div .id, again we can put Q in there, and then key div .class name, and this is also very important if you want the correct formatting or style. Remember, we use key. We use a key as a class selector. If you have doubt, take a look at your CSS. There's a .key that we used last time for each key, right? So that it has the right size and color. And so here we have the basic key, and want to insert the key. Again, append the key as a child, not to the keyboard now, but to the raw. Okay, so that's called raw div append child, and then put key div in there. Okay, so in this case we're appending the key div as a child to the raw. So refresh it, and you see that Q is inserted to each row. For now, let's focus on one row, because every time it's going to execute, repeat everything for 3 times, which is kind of confusing. So perhaps we can comment these 2 rows out by using again, you can select the 2 rows and then command / or control / on Windows. Okay, so by doing that, we only execute it once, right? So this is only 1 queue. Now if you need, for example, W, okay, so we can do that, and if we do that, we can kind of copy and paste, right? This is not a good idea, and you will see, right? So again, we can do this, right? So so to generate W, just by changing the inner HTML and W, but we need to copy and paste every key, and we have 26 letters on the keyboard. So that means this piece of code, there are 5 lines, 5 times 26. There are going to be over 100 lines of code in here. Okay, and if you need to change anything for each key, you need to change every key. So This is going to be very tedious, okay, because there's a lot of repetition, okay. So we don't want to do that. We don't want to do this repetition copy paste in the code. Fortunately, in JavaScript and in any programming language, you have this concept of loop or repetition, okay, that you can use just to repeat something for 100 times or even for a billion times. And that is the power of computing, right? So we should take advantage of that. And coupled with this concept of repetition, there is also this type of variable called array. Array. So normally when we talk about variable, it comes with just one value, right? If you have a letter in here as a string, or you have a number, right? That is 1, 2, 3, 4, right? Whatever number that is. But an array can contain a list of values, a list of letters, a list of numbers, and things like that. So I'm going to show you how we can do that. So imagine, again, take a look at the keyboard here, right? QWERTYUIOP, right? This is the first row. So it has how many? I think there are 10 letters, right? 10 alphabets on the first row. So we can create an array, okay? So I'm going to create using a var, okay? And I'm going to call it key list, okay? It's an array. And whenever you create an array, use a pair of square brackets, okay? And then inside the array, you put the values, okay, one by one, separated by comma, okay? And because these values are actually letters in strings, we need to put quote unquote, okay? So the first one in the quotes will be Q, comma, and then quotes, W, comma, quotes, E, comma. I think you get the idea, right? And so put in all the values, right? Quote U, I, O, P, right? I think I'm done here. Yeah. Okay. So we have the list of keys. Okay. Here I use var, but I think later in the future, I think it's probably more appropriate to use const. The difference between const or constant and var is that var is variable, so that means it's something you can change later. But const is the constant. That's something once you assign the list or a value to it, it doesn't necessarily change. Okay, so it can be more efficient. But for now, because you are already familiar with the concept var, let's just continue to use that. Okay, so once you have the list, we can create a loop or a repetition to go through each letter in the list and repeat the same thing, right? So we can use this for and then var key of key list. Okay, I hope this makes sense. So inside the for is the loop, is the repetition. var key, this is going to basically say take a key of the key list. So take an element, any element from the key list one at a time and from the very beginning. So the first one that is going to be will be Q and do something for it. Okay, and then next time go to W and treat it as key. Okay, so the first time the key will be Q and then you do something about it, and then the next time the key will be W and then you do the same thing for it, and then E and R and T and Y and so forth. Okay, so what do we do? What we want to do is essentially we want to insert keys to the new row. Okay, so we can actually cut. Okay, if you want, you can right click and then cut or command X. Okay, So I'm going to Command X, cut it, and then put the code, paste the code in between the curly braces, okay, in the loop. And that means this will be executed, okay. This will be executed, okay, for each element or each alphabet in the list, okay. So without any further change, let's go back to the page and refresh it. And for now, you see all the cues. It is repeated 10 times, but somehow it's all cues because we only put Q in the code, okay? So if we want to kind of show the actual letter that is on the list, we need to change the code a little bit. So instead of Q, we should put key, okay, without the quotes, because key is a variable, okay, in the loop that references each letter at a time, okay, in each iteration. So this is a variable that keeps track of which letter I'm on, okay. And once we have done that for the inner HTML, for the ID, save it and refresh it and see, voila, you have the first row ready, right? Now right now we already have the key, so we don't need to have this is the row, okay. So I want to remove it, so we can comment this out, okay. Just comment this out and refresh. We have a first row, okay. Now if you ever try to render key row again for the second time and refresh it, it generates the same row. And this is kind of counterproductive. Why do we want the same row again? We want a different row, right? We want the ASDF. So how can we do it? Okay, so there is also a concept of function arguments. So in this function, when we call it, we provide nothing to the function, right? It's an empty parentheses, okay? So it repeats the same thing because we put this list, right? This list is always going to be the same, okay? So instead of putting hard code the key list inside the function, we can take it out, okay? So let's cut it, okay? So Command X to cut it, and I want to put it out, okay? Paste it inside the render keyboard right before the render key row, okay? So once we have done that, in the render key row function, we can add something like key list, okay? So, and then, okay, I'm going to and then when we call the render key row, we provide key list, okay, from the variable above, okay. And the second time when we call it, we're going to change it, okay. We can say we're going to change the key list right before, and then change these keys to A, S, D, F, right? I'm typing the keys for the second row, J, K, L, right? So this is the second row, and again, I provide the key list as an argument, okay? So if you follow me, right, before I call the first render key row, I assign a list of keys, the QWERTY UIOP, to the key list, and then use the key list as data or as parameter or argument for the key row function, okay, and call it. Second time I change the key list to another list, to the second row, and then again I call it again, okay. So let's give it a try, and then I will explain again, okay. So right now, as you can see, the two rows are different because I provide different parameters. Okay, and I also kind of introduce another way to write the code. Okay, so I can change the key list, or I can put this list directly inside the function call here. So I can basically cut and paste or copy and paste here. Okay, so I'm giving this list as the data for the function, so that when I execute the function will know that it's going to generate the key row based on different data or different list of keys. So again, let me use my pen just to explain, because this is a very important concept. Okay, this is related to arguments of a function, and it's going to make your functions very powerful and more reusable, right, if you know the right way to use it. Okay, so let me see if I can use my unfortunately my annotation tool is not here, but again, let me try to explain from what I have here. Okay, so if you look at the second call, okay, so render key row in the render keyboard, right? In the argument, I provide this list of keys for the second row. Okay, so this is a function call to the render key row function, okay, which is going to basically take call the function, and then this list of keys A, S, D, F, G, H, J, K, L will basically, and let me just copy here, okay, that data, right, will be passed on to this key list. Okay, so when this function is called down there, the key list will become A, S, D, F, G, H, J, K, L. Okay, and the loop here, because the loop is based on the key list, okay, is going to generate a row of keys consistent to the list that you give it. I hope this makes sense. Okay, so so this argument, key list, and you know, you can apply it to other places as well. Okay, so now we know we can generate the second row, we can certainly generate a third row, okay, using the same idea. So we are going to pass a different list of keys, and so this is going to be Z, X, right, the third row, C, V, B, N, M. I think that's it, right? So once we've done that, refresh the page and you have the third row. Now, one last question. You may wonder, like, okay, all these key rows are aligned to the left. Can we center it, right? As most keyboards would do, right? You probably want to prefer kind of align them to the center. And it's actually very easy to do. Okay, so remember, you know, for each key row, right, it's using the flex design. So in flex design, remember we have this justify content, right? And in justify content, you can say I want to justify to the center, okay, because this is part of the key row. And again, our render key row function is creating each row that belongs to the class of key row. So this is going to use that class selector. Okay, so again, we change the justify content to center for each key row, and if we refresh it, this is going to center everything. Okay, so I hope all this makes sense. And again, I think when you try to do all the code, you may encounter issues, and your best friend is this more tools, developer tools. And for JavaScript specifically, you want to look at the console. Okay, so the console is a friend. If there are issues, you are going to see them in the console. Okay, and just look at the code line where you have problems. So perhaps here I can try to do something like, okay, class name, right? So if I do this lowercase class name and I refresh it, actually it somehow allows me, but it's actually incorrect, right? Because it does not apply the class. And so once I apply the correct name, let me try a different thing. So append child, okay, if it's lowercase, okay, refresh, it's going to say that append child is not a function, okay, because JavaScript is case sensitive. So and it point to where the problem is line 36. So if you're going to go to line 36 and look at append child, okay, your focus is here, okay, and change C to capital will fix the issue. Okay, so this is one way. And then another way to look at is that if everything, the code has no problem, but your rendering is not correct, you can try to go to the elements, okay, and then follow the structure of the code, right? If your JavaScript has done the job correctly, you should generate these 3 key rows, and then inside each key row you have the keys, okay? So these are dynamically generated in the elements, because you do not have those in HTML, right? They are generated by your JavaScript. So check them, and then you can even select each row and check the CSS. If the CSS are not applied here, probably that may be due to your your selectors. So check your selectors again. Think things can get a little bit tricky, but with the tools they can help, kind of help you do a better job, or make your job easier. Okay, so hopefully these help. But if you have issues, you can also comment below, and I will get back to you if I have time to look at your comments. Okay, so we'll talk to you later. See you in the next video. Bye bye.